What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to this edition of B. Schaefer Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here with you. It is Friday, March 8th, 2024, and we don't have good news to talk about today because John Mozeliak met with reporters down in Jupiter earlier this afternoon ahead of the Cardinals night game in the Grapefruit League on Friday night with injury updates. And, of course, I'm not down there anymore. I'm back here in Missouri, but plenty of reporters still down there in Jupiter, and we'll share a little bit about what John Mozeliak had to say through those reports and react to what it means for the Cardinals as they march toward opening day on March 28th, potentially without two-thirds of their projected starting outfield. Hit that subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner of your screen if you enjoy Cardinals content throughout the season. That's what we're going to bring you here on the St. Louis Cardinals writer, Brenden Schaeffer, St. Louis Cardinals writer YouTube channel, youtube.com/@bschaeffer12. Also, please do follow and subscribe to the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Helps me out a great deal if you do. Let's go ahead, though, and get right into the news of the day, which is more concerning news on Lars Nootbaar than we maybe initially expected, and kind of confirmation of our priors a little bit when it comes to Tommy Edman and what he's dealing with right now for the Cardinals and his recovery from that surgically repaired wrist. Yeah, it's not exactly going along on a timetable that's going to put him in action for opening day. Doubtful was the word used by John Mozeliak, according to the tweet that I saw from Derek Gould this afternoon. And that was something that we kind of already maybe expected to be the case. Yesterday on the podcast, we talked about, or it might have been 2 days ago by this point, I talked with Charlie Marlowe on Low-Hanging Fruit, which I did throw over on the B. Schaefer Daily feed on Spotify. The video version on Charlie's channel on YouTube, go check it out, Low-Hanging Fruit with Brenden Schaeffer and Charlie Marlowe. We talked a little bit about it, but in the previous B. Schaefer Daily, we talked about Tommy Edman extensively and the idea that there's no guarantee that not only is he going to be ready for opening day, this thing is something that could linger for weeks and weeks and potentially months if the Cardinals don't figure out why it is that Tommy Edman is not on the schedule that they were hoping to see for him in recovery from this surgery. Situation where he was ramped up, he was getting close to maybe entering into some batting practice scenarios, and the Cardinals pulled the plug on it about, we don't know exactly, a week and a half ago. He then, like 3 days ago, ramped back into trying to do some activities. But then yesterday, we saw the tweet from John Denton, the report from the Cardinals being that Edman's still experiencing some trouble with the right-handed swing. And now today, Mozeliak using the term doubtful to describe his readiness for that opening day roster, which, again, I think is something that's been lingering in the background ever since the news of his October surgery came to light in November, December, whenever that was, late November, early December. And now it's kind of coming to fruition. The possibility that it could go sideways is sort of happening on the Cardinals with Edman. We talked on the B. Schaefer Daily last time about, hey, Dylan Carlson actually profiles similarly offensively to Tommy Edman. So maybe it's a case where Dylan could kind of seize this opportunity and make the center field job his own. Now, so far in spring training, he hasn't done much offensively. He's going to see plenty of time, you figure, in center field moving forward in Grapefruit League. But at last check, he's 2 for 18, which is a 111 batting average and just no real power. I think he might have a double in those 2 hits, but just not a lot going on for Dylan to this point offensively, which kind of makes you wonder about other center field options, right? Because if Edman's not out there, they're going to have to turn to somebody else. And if Dylan's not producing offensively, would they be inclined to, as we talked about in the last episode, move Lars Nootbaar from left to center with some level of frequency during the regular season? If the lineup's not producing, that might be a way to boost it by moving Nootbaar over and figuring out somebody that can outproduce Carlson offensively that you would then put into left field. Well, now Lars Nootbaar's hurt. The update on Lars Nootbaar from John Mozeliak, and this is according to reports from John Denton, from Derek Gould. I haven't seen necessarily any other reports, but we'll credit any that I do see. We'll put John Denton's tweet up, though. Took a screenshot. John Denton says that Lars Nootbaar has 2 non-displaced fractures in his ribs on the left side, per President of Baseball John Mozeliak, adding Nootbaar will refrain from swinging or playing in the field for the next 2 weeks, which, again, today's March 8th. That brings it to March 22nd. The opener, March 28th. The Cardinals are hopeful that he will be ready. for opening day against the Dodgers, despite the news that was shared on Friday. Yeah, I don't know about that. Non-displaced rib fracture, cracked ribs, I think is essentially what we're talking about here. The Cardinals say, hey, couple of weeks of no activity, maybe then you ramp up real quick, and they're hopeful for opening day. I don't know how you could possibly be hopeful for opening day for Lars Nootbaar. Does he have a better chance than Tommy Edman of making opening day? I would say at this point that is an affirmative, yes. Tommy Edman, to me, has no shot. It's a done deal. He's going to be on the IL to start the season. That's my prediction. Lars Nootbaar, I put it at like a 90+% chance he's on the IL to start the season. Maybe I'd lower that. I'd lower it to like 80% that he's on the IL, 90 to 95% that he's not going to play opening day. If it's a case where 2 weeks off and then he can ramp back up, and within that first week he could be ready, so they don't want to put him on the IL and have to burn him for a full 10 days, maybe that's a possibility. But I'm going to say that's very unlikely as well, because we know that if Dylan Carlson's the only guy who can play center field on this roster, you put yourself in a bad position. Like, yeah, you can throw other human beings out there at the spot. It ain't going to look good. So they're going to have to plan the roster around that. You can't basically carry Lars Nootbaar in Los Angeles if he's not out there able to field at any given moment. So I'm going to say he's probably on the IL along with Tommy Edman, and the Cardinals are staring down the barrel of 2/3 of their projected starting outfield, starting the season on the injured list. Oh, yeah, and the Sonny Gray hamstring thing is also still sort of hanging in the balance. Let's go ahead and do that real quick first, though, because Sonny Gray from the Cardinals complex down in Jupiter alongside A.J. Przinsky talked on the Foul Territory podcast a little bit about what he's doing. So I want to give you the quick update on Sonny from the horse's mouth directly, and then we'll go ahead and dive into our thoughts on Edman, on whether Dylan Carlson could fill in, what it is for Lars Nootbaar, and whether Victor Scott is going to be an option there as well. Because John Mozeliak, according to tweets that I have seen, did address the notion of could Victor Scott make this team, and I think it's interesting what he had to say. But I do want to focus on a little bit real quick Sonny Gray, because I don't have much to add to it other than what he said on the Foul Territory podcast. So we'll play a quick clip from that and then react to it before we get back to the outfield discussion. Sonny Gray was asked by the Foul Territory guys if there's a chance that he could be ready to pitch by opening day. Here was that exchange from earlier's Foul Territory podcast. And we'll play that audio now.
Is there a chance though that you could pitch opening day still?
I don't know. I doing everything I can to put myself in a position to be available, but it's I just don't know. I played catch today, so I threw, and then I don't throw the day after I pitch ever. Anyways. Then an off day yesterday. So as far as the throwing things, I haven't didn't miss a day of throwing. Played catch today. But I don't know. Probably no more through the weekend to be honest with you.
That's Sonny Gray. Not really a lot to glean just yet. I think we're a little bit too early in terms of, like, he's back to throwing and doing some baseball activity, trying to get back out there, but it's about the ramp up, right? I think the hamstring is going to be minor. That's kind of what we've talked about. That's what we've expected, but it's about the ramp up. His arm is not midseason form. He is not built up to pitch 5, 6, 7 innings in a given start. He was to like 2, 3 innings in a given start, and then you go pause. That's an aspect that's going to have to be considered in this when it comes to Sonny Gray. But I just, because there was some audio from him, wanted to give it a listen. I honestly hadn't even listened to it myself until I did just there, the full version. I think he does go on to say a little bit more, but Foul Territory, go check out their podcast. A.J. Przinsky, I know, is on that with a couple other former players. They do a great job. So just wanted to share that real quick. But let's go ahead and dive into a little bit more on the conversation about the outfield, because with Edman out, presumably for opening day, with Lars Nootbaar out, we think, based on Friday's news, for opening day. And again, the Cardinals can say they're hopeful, but I can say, look, you've got 3 weeks, less than 3 weeks from today until opening day. I know nothing. So what did I do? I Googled it and said, non-displaced rib fracture. What is that? Recovery time. Well, Yale Medicine told me usually like 6 weeks. So again, I think it could be less than that, certainly. They're probably not usually talking about professional athletes when they're putting those timelines on things. But to think that no activity for 2 weeks and then 6 days ramp up, good to go in the lineup on March 28th in L.A., I don't think he's facing Shohei that day. I think Shohei's going to be in the Dodger lineup. Lars is not going to be in the Cardinal lineup. That's my prediction. So if that's the case, where do you go from here if you're St. Louis? What do you do with center field? Dylan Carlson's hitting 111 in spring. I would love nothing more than to see Dylan Carlson take hold of the job and run with it for the Cardinals in center field in the absence of these players. He hasn't done it to this point. And I do worry a little bit in terms of, like, where's that confidence going to come from if he doesn't have it right now? Because, yeah, you were told all offseason you're the fourth outfielder, kind of the afterthought, the forgotten man in the equation, and that probably doesn't feel too good from a personal standpoint. But you also understand that, man, if you're the fourth outfielder that can play all of the spots in the outfield, you're probably in a position to get a good amount of run during the 2024 season. I don't know where Dylan Carlson's head's at right now. I can't climb in there and get that information. I hope he's in a spot where he feels like, yeah, this is an opportunity for me, and I can go out and make the most of it. So far, not a lot of production in spring. If that upticks, I think you'll feel pretty good about Carlson going into the season as basically the primary center fielder every day. However, if that doesn't take place, and even if it does, you do need to consider who's going to be the other guy on the 26-man roster that can field the center field spot. Because if we're talking about the IL, you're talking about Sonny Gray potentially on the IL. He doesn't know. We'll know more through the weekend, and maybe by Monday, a better idea of whether it's even a possible target for Sonny to make the opening day roster and take that start like he was planned to do. So we'll know then. But if the answer is no, it's probably like, Zach Thompson on the roster, which he probably was going to be anyway. Matthew Liberatore probably on the roster, maybe as a starter, maybe as a reliever, but they both make it, and then you figure that out from a bullpen perspective. But we can isolate this to position players and say Edman, IL, Nootbaar, IL. Who takes the spots? I'm guessing it's going to be Burleson because he can play left field. And then somebody that can play center field has to probably be the other roster spot. Don't know 100% that that's going to be the case, but if you figure that the general version of your lineup looks like Donovan at second, Gorman at DH, I know you can switch that around in any way you please. It could be Burleson. Now he's on the roster, and he's your DH with Donnie in left and Gorman at second. Don't get caught up in where of it all. I'm going to look at the opening day 9 that are going to see the lineup and say it's probably between second base, DH, left field, and center. It's probably Gorman, Donovan, Burleson, Carlson. Lots of ins at the end for that lineup. I think that's probably what you're looking at for those 4 spots. And then you're talking about a bench of, we know Carpenter, we know Brandon Crawford, we know Ivan Herrera, who had a little bit of an injury situation for him. A stinger, I think, is what he had, but that was about a number of days ago. We never really talked a lot about it. He wasn't in the lineup, and now I think he's good to go. So hopefully that's nothing that follows him. So then you're basically looking at one more bench spot that I think an outfielder would fit, right? Because if we're talking about Carlson in center now and Burleson perhaps in left, or maybe Burley's the DH and Donnie's in left, whatever it looks like, you have on your bench no outfielder to be that, like, bench outfielder. So it needs to be somebody who can play center field. On the 40-man, let me correct myself. On the 40-man roster right now is Michael Ciani. Got a little bit of run late last season, hit like 167, didn't get very many opportunities. I don't know if that was like a 1 for 7 or specifically what it was. Ciani this spring is like 2 for 12, but he's got a handful of walks, so he's got like a 440 on base. Again, limited sample in the Grapefruit League, but he can play center field, and he's on the 40-man roster. That's the easiest solution, and the Cardinals historically typically cater to the easiest solution that doesn't rock the boat, doesn't make waves, isn't very bold, conservative. That's probably Michael Ciani, and I'm not saying he can't do a nice job. I'm just saying that's the logical step that we expect the Cardinals, knowing how they operate, to make, assuming Nootbaar and Edman are both on the IL to start. Here's the one that could be fun, though. And again, I'm not saying Michael Ciani's not fun. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But I know we all are thinking it. Victor Scott. How exciting, how tantalizing could it be to, hey, if there's an opening in center field and he could play it every day and you could slide Dylan to a corner. And honestly, from a platoon standpoint, it could work out nicely. Dylan Carlson bats righty against lefties. He plays left field, and Burleson slides in against righties, plays left field, and you could platoon it that way. Although you do want to find ways to get Donnie and Gorman both in the daily lineup, so that may not fit. But in general, you need a bench outfielder that can play center field. I don't think anybody would debate that. So if Carlson's not playing well, and you would go into it going, Victor Scott, if he's looking good, and maybe he'd have to outplay Carlson for sure. Otherwise, it's Carlson's gig with Siani on the bench. But let's say Carlson continues to struggle, not to the extent that he wouldn't make the team or anything, but that you maybe would more consider him as a platoon guy. Don't expose him to right-handed pitching. Start him against lefties if he's looking better on that side of the plate, and figure out what you do with center field by putting a guy like Victor Scott in there and giving him some legitimate run. I don't know how possible it is. It was asked by the reporters. I saw it from John Denton's timeline. I'll find the tweets here. Whether Victor Scott could be considered, whether he could open enough eyes to make the team. Here's the tweets from JD. John Mozeliak on rookie speedster Victor Scott's chances to make the roster with Lars Nootbaar and Tommy Edman injured. Quote, I think we have to be a little more patient with that. Clearly, he's opened up some eyes early on, but we have 3 weeks of camp left, so there's a lot of time to still make some judgments and decisions, and we'll see how things go. So a lot of word salad there at the end, but at the beginning, patient. We might want to be more patient with that. Certainly, it doesn't benefit them to say, yep, we're looking at him, but they could still make the decision later on if it looks like they should, if what they see on the field necessitates that decision. I thought there was maybe another quote as well. Mozeliak saying of the idea that both these guys, Edman and Nootbaar, could be out, again from John Denton's Twitter, quote, not ideal. The level of concern is real, but you always have to remind yourself that opening day is not the entire season. Being patient and getting these guys back to where we think they are best suited to be successful is more important than worrying about some time missed. So again, patience. It's kind of the status quo, right? They're never going to overreact to anything at this point in the season, even if it could be kind of bad. It's not necessarily them lying about the injuries, but it is a little PR spin, right? And at this point, I think if they're spinning it, we could see through that spin that both these guys are probably on the injured list to begin the season, and that's no good because you've got a pretty brand new right fielder in Jordan Walker who's learning the ropes. He spent all offseason in Jupiter trying to get better defensively, but he's still relatively green at the position. The idea was get a guy in center like Tommy who can get any ball and can have exceptional range, and he's gonna be able to ease the burden of a newer right fielder like Jordan Walker. With no Edman, and now Nootbaar as a probably plus left fielder not in the mix, and Burleson's been working his tail off all off season too to be a suitable left fielder. What does that end up looking like if it's Burleson, Carlson, Walker? I don't think that's it's not a good defensive outfielder in terms of the range that you expect to be able to cover. And I think Dylan can do it. I think he can be a plus center fielder. I think he's been that for the Cardinals before. He's got to play with confidence and own that spot as his, and I think you'll see the results if he does that. But still, with Burleson to the left, or I guess to his right, as he's like looking into home plate, and Walker to his left, there's going to be a lot of balls that fall in. Even if those guys have made strides, it's just they're not going to be plus in terms of their range to this point. I'd be surprised if either Burleson or Walker are quite to that extent where we would describe them as a plus range guy in left or right field. That's where Victor Scott comes in. He's got speed to burn. He's got instincts defensively. I'll tell you right now, if we know that Edman is, like I said it on the last podcast, if we hear the word specialist and Tommy Edman in the same sentence within the next 2 weeks, Victor Scott is on my opening day roster, and he's starting in center field. I don't know who's going to be pitching for the Dodgers yet. I haven't seen that, so that doesn't mean no Dylan. Dylan could play left. Burleson could play left. Donnie could play left. Whatever they end up doing. Victor Scott would be, if we know that it's going to be a little while for Edman, if they're talking specialist, if they have to go back to the drawing board and figure out why it's not healing, why he's not recovering and feeling good after the surgery. I'm not saying that will happen, but if it happens, Victor Scott's my center fielder, almost regardless of what he hits defensively offensively the rest of spring. He's hitting like 188 so far. He's going to get his chances the next couple of weeks. He will. I don't really care. He can bat ninth, and he can hit 180, and it could be what it is. He's going to stabilize the defense for a pitching staff that will be starving for it. After last year's defense wasn't up to par, it was a pitch-to-contact group. We've seen I think Michaelis is going to have a bounce back. But Kyle Gibson's given up a lot of contact so far. I want Victor Scott in center field if Tommy Edman's not going to be. Unless Dylan Carlson shows me the next couple of weeks, hey, I'm ready for this. I've got my mind and my confidence where it needs to be to own center field like he did at times last year. We saw it. We saw glimpses of it from Dylan Carlson, despite the Cardinals kind of yanking him around and really not ever giving him that stable runway, which some would argue didn't earn the stable runway. Others would say neither did guys like Tyler O'Neill, and you gave it to him. So I'm not here to debate whether or not they did the right thing last year. I'm talking about the fact that they can't mess it up this year. 2024 is too important to the organization because they're at risk of a backslide that will signal the rebuild word will start to surface if this year doesn't go well. You're going to see sweeping changes for this organization is my prediction if this season doesn't go well. And the powers that be would prefer that not to happen because they keep their jobs or they keep their legacy or whatever the case might be. Everybody, whether that's Mo's legacy, whether that's DeWitt's legacy, obviously Ollie is managing on the final year of his contract. All of these things are at stake this season for the St. Louis Cardinals. So what does that mean? Unless Michael Ciani's really impressing you at the plate, you cater to the guy that you perceive has more upside, which is Victor Scott. Again, if he's getting absolutely overmatched the next 2 weeks, Victor Scott, then I maybe make a different decision. But if he even shows you a flash, if he's got the look in his eye, that might be enough for me because I know defensively, I don't think the moment's going to be too big for Victor Scott. I think he's got a head on his shoulders. I think he's a guy that has a hunger to learn and grow and improve. The timeline might be more expedited than the Cardinals are willing to venture with this, and they may not do it. I would almost be surprised if they did it, barring him just becoming the story of camp for the next 2 weeks. But if Victor Scott does even anything close to that, he's my guy. And the reason I feel comfortable doing it is because, yes, with young prospects, they typically aren't going to bring you up until they're ready to keep you up. That was the Mason Wynn situation last year, right? They waited. Eventually, we saw Mason Wynn toward the end of the season, and he stayed and he played pretty much every day. With all of these injuries, I think there is latitude for Victor Scott to have that run. Now, when Edman comes back, it's different. I get that. But what's going to hurt the guy in terms of if it's a month that he plays and gets that big league experience? And yeah, maybe if everybody's healthy, that's the perfect world that we're living in. And the Cardinals rarely get to live in that world. That's just been the reality, right? But if Edman, Nootbaar are both back and good to go, that's your outfield. That's okay. Victor Scott can go back to AAA. You can allow him to season up at that point, especially if he's not performing. If he's taken the job and run with it, if he's Michael Harris of the Braves a number of years ago and just out of nowhere just takes it and goes, then he stays. And you figure out what to do with other players, and that's showbiz. But I think there's room to say, look, if this is going to be an extended period for Edman, or we don't know when he's going to be back, why beat around the bush with this season that's so important? Take your shot at fixing the damn thing. I'm not saying Michael Ciani couldn't come in and be fine. I'm not even saying he couldn't come in and be good. I'm not saying that Dylan Carlson couldn't go all of spring, hit 150, and then show up opening day and be the dude. Could happen. We've seen it in sports. But if you're skeptical at all that it would, Victor Scott, that would be, because if you're talking about trying to spark a team where the odds are stacked against you, your opening day starter is on the mend, 2 of your 3 starting outfielders, maybe not ready for opening day. You just lost 91 games. People are skeptical about your starting rotation, whether you have enough top-end guys to get it done, and on and on and on. I think you go, look, we need a spark, and we need it from the jump. Is it bold? Very. Is it reckless? Might be. I still think it's the way that I personally would go. It's not me saying the Cardinals are going to do it, right? I've described every which way that I can. That's not their style. And especially if they're hopeful to get Edman back by April 15th or May 1st or whatever, they're not going to rush to push Victor Scott unless they are absolutely compelled to do so. We'll wait and see what it ends up being for the St. Louis Cardinals at this point. But I would really strongly consider it. I'm watching Victor Scott very closely for the rest of spring training because he could force that issue and then make the Cardinals make a decision that they're not comfortable making. But that might be the best thing for them. Cardinal fans, let me know in the comment section below what you think of this situation. Do you think that the Cardinals might be at all inclined to consider Victor Scott if he's looking good in spring training? How worried are you about Tommy Edman's wrist being something that continues to have some setbacks? Maybe he wakes up tomorrow and it's the first day of the rest of his life and it's all uphill from here. But maybe it's not. And that's kind of where the Cardinals have to be able to position themselves, looking not only about opening day, but what's it look like on April 15th? What's it look like for this roster on May 1st, May 15th, June 1st? And how does Edman fit into that? How does Lars Nootbaar fit into that with the cracked ribs that he has and that he's dealing with? Maybe a 4 or 5 week injury, and you've got 3 weeks of runway before opening day. What's it going to look like for the Cardinals? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? Is the sky falling? Let me know in the comments below, and let me know for the next video, what should I pontificate on? What should I talk about? What's the angle on all of this that I've missed so far that you think I need to jump into on Be Safe Daily? That's going to do it, though, for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys, as always, for listening. Make sure to hit like on this video, hit subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you next time on Be Safe Daily. Peace.